All right, here we go. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Neo4j Live. Today we have the topic of G.V, a graph native IDE for Neo4j, and I'm very happy to have Arthur join me today. Hi, Arthur. How are you doing?
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me, Alex. Doing great. Looking forward to demoing a bit of GLV and just chatting about IDEs for graph databases in general. Should be
Yeah,
fun.
should be fun. Should be good. I'm very much looking forward to it. We had a very interesting brief look at it, you and I, earlier. So I'm very excited. I think it's a cool tool that you've built. So I'm it's gonna be a nice event. As usual, I like to keep it interactive as much as possible. So if you have any questions, any comments on what you're seeing or generally, please let us know in chat. It's always something I'm trying to look at and to incorporate during these sessions. So you're welcome to share your comments there. And as always, this session will be available on YouTube afterwards. So all the links that we share and all the information you will find in the show notes or in the YouTube description for later if you want to re, you know I don't know how to say re-look at those. I guess look at those again.
Watch it after the facts.
Exactly. So Arthur, before we dive in, maybe a few words about yourself. Who are you exactly? What are you doing? And how did you get to build G.V and how did you come into the world of graphs? Maybe
Yeah,
that's
of course,
that's a
absolutely. I was planning to cover some of that in my little short presentation, but I'll really give you. In fact, what I'll do is I'll start a presentation there
oh
so
yeah
you can
yeah
follow
if you
along.
yeah we can
Go.
slide into that.
Slide straight to the slideshow. Let's go.
Let's go. Exactly.
All right, cool. So, yeah, about myself, real quick. So, my name is Arthur Bigeard. I'm the creator of G.V. Now, I always address that first of all. G.V is pronounced G.V because it can be sometimes a little bit confusing.
Mm,
It actually started as a software for the Apache Tinkerpop class of graph databases, which is actually the reason behind the name.
mhm.
But we're now supporting a whole bunch of different graph databases. And the way I got into GW is kind of accidental almost. I used to always use relational databases, as I'm sure many Neo4j users have as well. And one day I was kind of stumped on a technical exercise for a job interview where I had to do a proof of concept using a graph database, something that I'd never used before.
Mhm.
And the graph database technology that I used at the time was really lacking in terms of tool. And I came from a space where I'd already used some really advanced integrated development environments for relational databases and products like MySQL Workbench or DataGrip. So I was having some really high expectations as to what I would be able to do to interact with the database. And with that specific technology that I was using, I quickly found that my expectations were just maybe set a little bit too high.
Mhm.
And at that point, I was like, well, hold on, that could be a really fun project to take on. What if I just built my own little user interface to interact with this database and allow me to do the things that you want to be doing? I want to connect to my database, I want to query the data, I want to visualize it, explore it, tweak it, and I want it to be as seamless and as easy as possible so that I guess myself as a developer becomes more productive in doing my day-to-day graph database work. So that's sort of how GW started. It was very much a small passion project for a few years.
Mhm.
And it built up to the point where I've been able to actually start doing it full time. And when I did
Cool.
that, I thought, well, why should I just stop at Apache Tinkerpop? There's, quite a few other more prominent graph databases out there, let's say Neo4j, for instance.
Mm.
Maybe I can apply all of the work that I've done there to other technologies, which is how I've ended up with support for this many graph databases, and including, of course, both Neo4j and AuraDB as well. So that's the sort of story of GW.
Yeah.
It was very much a passion COVID project, I want to almost say,
Oh yeah, yeah,
that turned
yeah.
into a company slowly but surely over time.
That's fun. So you basically you got introduced to graphs and had some pain points, I guess,
Yeah,
and said,
yeah.
okay, yeah, well, this needs to change. It's funny. It's oftentimes when I talk to people is they have a data challenge and then they discover graphs when they when they see, okay, oh, this is a new way of doing things. This is a new opportunity here that opens up possibilities that are usually or previously maybe have been difficult or not as easy to be solved. And in your case, it's a bit the other way around. Somebody else said, hey,
yeah, I really took this specific problem quite backwards.
yeah.
But in the process, I've developed a real passion for graph databases as a whole as well, and you'll be happy to know that ever since I've never gone back to Relational. Although I'm unfortunately maybe not the typical graph database user, being that I don't necessarily get to implement my own projects around graph database. I rather implement projects that are for graph databases specifically. So I'm a bit of an odd user, but I get to play with all sorts of data sets and databases on a day-to-day basis. So
yeah, but
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that's great too if you help people solve their challenges and even make them aware of a different way of thinking, and oftentimes this can be very eye-opening at some point where they say, yeah, wow, this is really nice.
Hopefully you'll get a bit of those wow moments during the demo. That's the goal, but we'll see how that goes.
Well, that's great. So yeah, do you wanna give us a little overview of what G.V does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to dive into a couple little things. So today during the demo, you'll be able to follow along if you want to.
Oh, cool.
G.V is meant to be easy to install and configure. So if you'd like, you can just go ahead and download it just now, install it on your computer, provided that you're not in a large corporation that might make this a bit difficult. And then you'll be able to kind of just follow along as we go. I was also going to say, if you want to find out more about us as a company and our products, we are on a bunch of social media, of which I've got the links right there. And that's a good way to keep track of like what we're up to and just general graph database ecosystem news. And the last thing before I jump into the demo is I was just going to show a little picture to kind of highlight how I came into feeling the need for building a graph database integrated development environment. So I briefly mentioned before that I was a heavy relational database user, and one of the tools I've used a lot during that time was something called MySQL Workbench, which is arguably one of the most popular and longest standing database integrated development environment, period. And so what is MySQL Workbench? Well, it's a desktop application that connects to your relational databases with the ability to write your, in this case, SQL queries, of course. Providing you some help as you write your queries. SQL is not a simple language, so you can do a little bit of hints as you go along. Once you've written your query, you can just go ahead and visualize the data, the results of your query in a format that is generally suitable for the type of data that you're dealing with. So of course, for relational databases, you're going to see a lot of tables. And just also provide a wider context on your database. So, for instance, it could be things like your data schema, which is always useful to know because that's ultimately what's going to allow you to know the structure of your data as you're querying it. And so with that set, I just want to basically jump straight to a demo of G.V. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that over and we're going to have a look. So today for the demo, I'm going to be using both Neo4j running locally on my computer and AuraDB. We're going to go from scratch. We're going to show what the setup is when you connect to your Neo4j database. And then we're just going to start going through the functionality bits by bits, just trying to highlight what is there to help you with, what you can do in it. We're not necessarily going to cover all the functionality, but we're going to try and do broad strokes of what you can do with the software. And if you're following along, hopefully you'll be able to do the same thing as you go. So the first step is, as you'll see...
Arthur,
sorry, go ahead.
Two things. One thing, could you try to hide the little sharing your screen? Yeah,
there we go.
And this is so once you install it, and this is where it starts, right?
That's exactly it. That's right.
Okay.
So once you've installed G.V and started it, this is the screen that you're going to see. So as you can see, first of all, it is a desktop application. We still make those out there. They exist. It's the format that I believe is still best suited for an integrated development environment. So that's what we've gone with. But once you're on that welcome screen, you can basically just get started and add your database connection. So all you need to do this is a running Neo4j database or AuraDB instance, whichever you have. And then you can just go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to pick Neo4j for my community edition. It's running locally, of course. It's going to be localhost. I'm going to have to enter my credentials. Now, quick thing here, because this is a software that is running locally on your device, all of the information that you enter on GW, that all stays within your device and within your network. We're not a SaaS solution where you have to see your data be processed through one of our servers or any of that. Everything happens directly between your computer and the databases that you're connecting to. That also means, of course, you need to make sure that you have connectivity to your database from within your computer. So if you've got any firewall rules on your AuraDB instance, you need to make sure they're allowing you to connect. But typically, if you're a developer like me, you'll be able to just do that because that's going to be part of your day-to-day coding workflow. So once I enter my credentials, I'll be offered optionally to pick which graph I want to use.
Nice.
Now, in this case, we're just going to use Neo4j, but if you had, say, multiple graphs, you could do that as well. I'm just going to give it a slightly friendlier name. In this instance, I believe I am using the Northwind guide dataset, and it's just going to be there to kind of guide us. We're not here to show, extremely crazy data sets. We're more just there to show the functionality that is available.
It's a good one for demos.
Yeah, and you guys got a really good variety as well. It keeps it pretty fresh. And so there we have it. Now I'm able to actually query my database. You'll see by default, we're just showing a very basic Cypher query. And there's going to be quite a few things to happen. I'm going to try and go in order. Now, the first thing is this specific instance I'm running does not have APOC enabled, which means that we don't have access to the schema procedures that allow us to load the schema structure, but we're actually going to be able to build that schema structure internally to GW as we query the data. And the other thing is this is not a very big data set, and GW can generally handle relatively large graph visualization. So I'm going to cheat just a tiny little bit. And to load the entire structure of the data, I'm going to load the actual entire data on the graph visualization. So you'll see here, that's me loaded the entire graph into a single graph visualization. And there's lots that's happening already.
Nice.
So the first thing, sorry, go ahead.
It's a nice hairball.
This is we're going to see some some hairballs today, guys. That's the perks of graph visualization at large scale, is it always ends up looking the same.
It kind of does. It's with graph visualization, it's always an interesting topic. It's always very cool to see those, but like in this case, it's a perfect example. Okay, but what I'm supposed to do with this?
That's right, and we'll talk about ways that you can sort of declutter that hairball as well a little bit within GW. But we're going to start with the very basics. So the first thing you'll notice is we do have a bunch of labels showing, but they're not super useful, right? We can see we've got products and customers and yada yadas. What we actually want to show is data, from the properties itself. So we're going to do a very quick styling the graph exercise. Typically, you have to do this only once and you're kind of good to go. We're just going to assign some labels to our elements. So for instance, we're going to just pick a bunch of names, very convenient in this case. We're going to take the ship address here. And as we do this, we'll start noticing that our graph is evolving to display those new labels. So product name, and then our supplier right there as well. I'm going to take, there we go, company name, save that. Now, every single graph visualization moving forward for this specific database is going to conform to this labeling format, which will just mean that, at a glance, we can kind of see what's in the graph, and we can sort of identify, more influential nodes in the graph as being sized a little bit bigger than the rest based on their degree. And so this graph visualization is going to be, I guess, one of the main features of GW, but it's not the only one. I'm actually going to come back to the graph visualization later. I'm going to talk about some other things around GW, and then we'll start digging into what exactly can be done on the graph visualization cell. So I'm just going to go ahead and close that. And the first thing that we're going to do is, as a sort of callback to what I mentioned earlier about the schema, is that now that we've loaded some of the data, we can actually see the structure of the schema on our database. So you'll see that despite not being able to load that information through the APOC procedures, GW is sort of proactively building an understanding of the schema as we're querying the data. Now, of course, because I just went ahead and queried the entire database and popped it all, we have a full understanding of the schema. But if you were using a really large instance, first of all, it might not be desirable to have schema procedures running on this because that can affect performance. You might say, well, there's going to be billions and billions of elements on this graph. I'm not going to be able to just go and load all that proactively. But as I'm querying it on GW, we're going to start building that picture of what our data is structured like. And that makes it super, super convenient for developers specifically to get a good understanding of what's in their graph database. Because if you, for instance, haven't taken the time to build constraints around your data,
Yeah.
it's entirely possible that you're going to have elements in there that you're perhaps not expecting, or that you've maybe not documented very thoroughly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so
I
you'll
think
see
that's very helpful. And also this view is giving you a lot of insights already. When you look at it from one quick glance at it, and you see, okay, the customer and the order and the supplier is all related. And if you haven't, maybe looked at a data model for a while, or if you're new into a data model, I think this view is particularly interesting, because it just gives you a good overview.
Yeah, and we're just sticking to the like age-old entity relationship diagram that we do offer a more basic view with just the elements showing. I like using the entity relation diagram because, as I've mentioned before, I'm a former heavy relational database user, so I'm very used to this format, but you can see it in a much simpler format as well, and you can just inspect elements, like properties, etc., directly on here. So you'll see, we can see what each properties are on our elements, their types, etc., etc. And this internal schema building exercise that GW performs then goes on to power a lot of the functionality in the software as well. So this is basically how we're going to determine, for instance, how elements are styled, with the ability to create style sheets, but it's also then going to allow us to perform autocomplete whilst we write our queries and display some useful documentation. So this is our data model view. Now, one of the things that we're going to be able to access now is our autocomplete. Now, autocomplete tools, as far as Neo4j is concerned, you guys have Neo4j browser, which is very good to provide all these query editing facilities. And GW's Cypher query editor is very similar in terms of scope and functionality. Really, the main difference is that we've got a slightly bigger emphasis on the query itself, as opposed to the graph visualization. So you'll see that we've got a full screen query editor there. And as we're writing our query, we're going to have access to some context-sensitive information that allows us to, again, as we're writing, see what everything is. So like, for instance, if I'm just trying to enter a vertex label filter here, and I'm kind of scrolling through the available vertex labels, cool. It's just going to tell us what these are. And that just makes it a little bit easier to navigate the structure of your data. But that doesn't necessarily stop you from just having it side by side here. So you can basically just put your query editor right beside your graph data model view and just see it side by side if you want. People have different preferences. Personally, I'm quite happy with just having it over there. But you're basically able to do it both ways. And if you don't like suggestion, you can just, turn Clippy off effectively and just make it go away. And then that just basically makes your life a little bit easier. That works for edge labels and for vertex labels, but also for properties. So for instance, if I were to say return s dot required, so you can see we've got our little property suggestions here. And once again, we're going to be able to see for each of these properties which vertices are going to be found on, and sometimes which edges as well. Sometimes you'll have the name property available across quite a few different vertex labels, and it's kind of a good reminder of what you can actually find on. So all that is really built to give you as pleasant as possible query editing experience, making it quicker for you to run your queries, write them, etc., etc. And then, once you've written your query, as mentioned earlier, you can just go ahead and run it, and you can visualize the results across a variety of formats. Now, of course, in this query, if I'm returning a path, then I'm going to get a graph visualization because we've got graph elements in our response. We've got nodes and we've got relationships. But you can run any type of queries you want, and you can see a variety of result formats as well. So, I go back to just running my path query. Graph visualization is going to show by default, which is something that you can modify whenever you want. But you can also just actually see it as a simple table, right? Again, if we group our results by the node labels, for instance, then we can very quickly compare them as a table. That's just a much more convenient way to quickly get a glance at the entirety of the data without necessarily having to wrestle with graph visualization. That's the same for edges as well. So I can pick up a specific edge. Now, this one, we've not got any properties, so that's not going to be super helpful. This one doesn't either. It's a bad example, but you can see your entire data across a variety of formats. Another one that I really like is the results version, which is trying to emulate the general structure of Cypher query results. Cypher query results are tabular. And so we want to offer a display that both gives you this sort of tabular view, but also sort of enriches the view with context from the structure of the element. So because we've returned a bunch of paths here, you can see our little p variable that's part of the results is being displayed as a table, but then our objects are going to be shown as paths with the actual details of what those paths are. And you can just go ahead and dive in straight to what exactly the path contains. If you like, you can search it as well. So, if I want to search for chai, then that's going to filter stuff that contains it. All the labels that are being used are also leveraged directly from the configurations that you've made here. So for instance, if I change my product label to, say, units in stock, and I go back to my results, I need to save that actually, apologies, there we go. That should, there we go. So now that shows us our units in stock instead. And so it just allows you to see the results across different formats that just give you the ability to compare them quite easily. And of course, you've got the obligatory JSON output, which can sometimes be useful. You've got the ability to export your results across a variety of formats as well. So sometimes you might just want to return a bunch of primitive values, pop them on a spreadsheet, pop them on a JSON object, put that somewhere else. You can do all that directly within G.V. It basically just, we aim to offer not just the graph visualization aspects, but other data visualization aspects that can be relevant to your use case. Because sometimes graph visualization, especially if you've got a hairball, is not really what you're going to be looking for.
No.
So that kind of covers on the results visualization side of things. But another thing, that is super helpful is just the ability to profile your queries. Now, this query specifically is not exactly demanding on the database. Sometimes, you might actually write a complex query. That could happen. And so when you do,
hopefully
you'll need to. You should get that far.
Yeah.
If you don't get that far, you're not doing it right, guys. Yeah. If you do get to that point, though, you'll want to maybe profile or explain the query so you can start identifying potential bottlenecks or optimizations. Maybe you'll see, hey, hold on, we don't have an index here that could be leveraged on this specific property. That would be useful. That would make lookups a little bit quicker. Let's look at the query profile. Let's see what Neo4j is telling us happens when we execute a query, identify potential bottlenecks, and just tweak our query, our database accordingly. And so G.V does not give you super smart suggestions as to what you should do. We're not quite at that stage yet, but it allows you to see all that information super conveniently. So, I've got my query right here. I want to see how it's run, and I want to see how it's performed. I can just access that in one click, so I don't have to go and run a separate profile or explain. So it's, again, just here to make your life as easy as possible. Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm impatient or lazy, but I like to be able to access things quickly. Yeah. And a lot of the UI is built around that as well.
I mean, that's a good point, right? You have it all there. You might as well have already run it. And then you can see, okay, yeah, maybe there's some optimization opportunity there. Sometimes it's better to do the explain or the profile before you actually execute. So you see, okay, yeah, before I go on a relatively large data set, and then I accidentally hit all property X on all my nodes, then might as well do it a little bit differently and run my queries
that's right. A bit differently. I was going to show you can run profile and explain queries, but it looks like that didn't quite behave the way I was expecting, unfortunately. So I'm going to come back to that. But I was going to say you should be able to just run your profile and explain directly before you run the query. That's another possibility. Unfortunately, because the demo gods are not playing ball with me today, that didn't work. But that should be there. So that all, again, allows it to. Now, you can have as many queries as you want, of course. We're very much built with the same sort of user interface kind of style as other traditional integrated development environments. Right now, I've just focused on showing one database in one query, but you can connect to as many graph databases as you want. So, if you got, like, say, a developer instance and prod instance and UAT instance and stage instance, or you happen to be working across multiple graphs, you can just connect them all directly on G.V. So I'm just going to pop over on my notes real quick to grab my credentials because I do not know them by heart. But if I go ahead and connect to my AuraDB instance here, there we go. So I'm just going to need my password, which won't be showing on screen, of course. And there we go. We're connected just like that. So again,
Nice.
super quick to
Yeah.
connect to your graph database. Typically, you'll spend a minute maximum doing that. And you can see now I've got a second graph database connection to, again, a different graph database. And that means I can work concurrently across multiple instances. So, again, if I query, I'll be able to see a different data set. This time is the Stack Overflow data set. And, sorry, my bad. There we go. Same exercise as last time, just bears repetition. First time around, you're going to want to just, style your graph a little bit, put stuff in there. Now, this one question, the title can be a bit lengthy, so our graph gets a little bit busier. We can change it to use something else. We can, for instance, use a creation date or a view count. But either way, you've got the ability to choose how you label your graph. You can actually, if you want as well. So we have this concept of style sheets, which is basically, well, I've got these node labels and I've got these relationship types in my database. Those are the colors and the labels, etc., that I'm going to assign to them. You can have different ones. You can have more than one style sheet at the same time, and you can seamlessly switch between them. In fact, if we just do a little quick check here, we're going to create a new one. Obviously, it's going to end up being the exact same, but I can go ahead and tweak that one if I want to. This isn't going to be super helpful. I don't know why it's done that. But we're going to just change a couple colors here. There we go. Save that. And then I can just switch between the two. So you'll see this one is using answer count and name. I can have a second one that uses this, for instance, title and link, right? And if I want to switch between the two, I can just then one click. Good to go. Simple as that. And so that means if you've got situations where you might need to visualize the data in different ways, you've got that ability as well. So now that we've kind of covered the ability to connect to the databases, the fact that you can do multiple ones, we're going to maybe just try and dive in a little bit more into the graph visualization stuff. So earlier, we had a bit of a hairball. We're going to get another hairball in there just for demo purposes. So we're just going to get a big old hairball there. We're going to take the entire Stack Overflow data set. We're just going to show it on the screen. And we've got a nice little hairball there. Great. And we're going to see how we can detangle it. I'm going to do a quick brief, first of all, on how the graph visualization works. So GLV is optimized to allow for very large scale graph visualization. That doesn't mean you're able to show billions of elements on the graph visualization. In fact, you probably should not want to do that because you're not really going to benefit from doing it. But you will be able to comfortably display tens of thousands of elements directly on your computer without any issue. We use WebGL-based rendering. Basically, it just uses your GPU instead of your GPU to do a lot of the rendering. That allows it to run a lot quicker. To give you an indication, I'm using, not a terrible device, but I'm using a MacBook Air from 2021, which is not necessarily the newest device available out there. They can comfortably handle tens of thousands of elements. And so that means if you want to show a big graph for whatever reason, sometimes it's just to wow people. Sometimes you want to do some visual analytics on it. You're most likely going to be able to do that on GWV unless you're running a very old PC. So in this case, we've got a nice big hairball. And there's a layout. So I should probably mention layouts. Layouts is how we showcase it. It's how we structure the data on the graph. Where do elements go? There's a layout that I really like to use to declutter things, which is called the community layout. And the way the community layout works is you need to give it some parameters. So you need to tell the community layout what properties am I going to use to group elements of the graph together to say, well, these are, for instance, the elements that have this property value and the elements that have this property value, et cetera, et cetera. So for instance, we're going to start picking some. So we're going to start with is accepted, and we're going to see, whoa, suddenly we've got two big balls over here, right? So is accepted happens to be a Boolean that can be true or false. And so what we have is one group of vertices that have been accepted, questions, answers that have been accepted, and another group of answers that have not been accepted. But then we can continue to kind of segment. We could segment it by view count, for instance. So you'll see now that our questions are being grouped into these tiny little clusters over there by view count. And again, that means we're slowly decluttering everything. We could also declutter by a score, for instance, right? And so score is going to further segment our answers, but it's also going to segment our comments. which on Stack Overflow can also have a score. And so you'll see we've probably got a large majority of score zeros, I would guess, over there, as it tends to be the case on Stack Overflow. And we've got some little outliers that might actually have a pointer or two. We can kind of just keep going like this. So for instance, answer count is also a good way to segment our question further. Now, obviously, the more you segment a specific node label, the more clustered it's going to get, which can be a bit inconvenient. Also, in this case, you'll notice that our tags and users aren't really segmentable, so we can probably just go ahead and hide these from the graph visualization altogether. And now we've got a slightly less hairball-y graph. There's a lot of relationships that are showing here, but you can start seeing some little clusters appearing. The graph visualization allows for a whole range of configurations. Like for instance, you can see things overlapping because my screen is perhaps not big enough, so I can make things a little bit smaller so it doesn't overlap quite strongly. Things are nicely decluttered now, right? And so now we've got a graph that is starting to breathe a little bit. And bear in mind, this is a graph that had, I believe, let's double check, 11,000 edges and just over 6,000 vertices. So it's naturally going to be quite hard to disseminate information from it. But with a few little techniques like this, we can start decluttering it and organizing it. Right, and then I can start showing some stuff over here. We're going to show the score on the comments, and then I can start zooming in, and we should start seeing some more interesting stuff show up, right? So you can see here our score that's going to be all our ones. I'm actually going to remove those tagged edges just so it's a little bit less messy, or is it commented? No, commented on. There we go. Cool. All right. I'm just decluttering it. So you can see here all our comments with a score of 1. We've got some outliers with a fantastic score of 3 over here, so they're doing really good, clearly. And then we've got the large majority of good old zeros. That's a very quick way of like disseminating the information on your graph. So there we go. On the topic of de-hairballing your graph, that's one way you can do it. Now, all layouts that are available are not applicable to all use cases. So for instance, if we were to look at a tree layout in this case, given the density of the graph, this is not going to be super helpful because we've just got too many elements. But if we were to use, say, a slightly smaller graph with 100 or so elements like this, you know, a hierarchical layout might be quite nice, just like that. I'm going to put on full screen just so we can have a look. We can see things are organized quite nicely. It's very readable. Now, the graph visualization itself is, of course, fully interactive. What that means is, you know, right now we're showing what's been loaded on the graph from the query itself. But what if I want to load a bunch of additional stuff? I could pick a little vertex and I can say, well, load me some. I'm going to load everything, so I'm not super familiar with this, but there we go. Now we can start loading additional data from the database itself and start displaying onto the graph. That works particularly well with a hierarchical layout where you'll see things are organizing themselves quite neatly around. Well, this one's got nothing else to load. It basically just means your graph visualization doesn't just allow you to reorganize things in a way that makes the visualization useful. It's something that you can then further expand on. You've even got the ability to, for instance, create a further query on a specific element in the graph with this little path query builder. I'm going to come back to this one. I'm not actually super familiar with this data set, so if I try and put one there, it's likely not going to work super well. But this is something that you can do. So that covers quite a bit of what the graph visualization do. There's a bunch of other useful things. So one thing you'll notice, for instance, is that elements aren't quite sized the same. Like Tortier over here looks a good bit bigger than most of the elements, and that's because by default we size everything by their degree. Degree meaning the amount of connections are coming into your node and the amount of connections are coming out of your node. But you can actually size it directly by properties. For instance, if I want to have a quick glance of what products might have the higher price, then I could size by unit price, and you'll start seeing that things are changing size based on the unit price of the individual elements in the graph. Saying if we look at our units on stock, we can quickly see this one probably doesn't have very many units on stock. In fact, if we look at it, it's got 0. But this one, which is a good bit bigger, has 42. So that basically just gives us ways of making the graph visualization adjust to what we're trying to highlight. There's tons of different things you can do. There's tons of different combinations. This also applies to edges as well. So if I want to size, for instance, my orders edges by one of the properties, I can do that. So you could size it by the quantity property on the relationship, which is probably the most useful one. And you'll mean, hey, the bigger the order, the bigger the edge. You'll see that some of them are starting to get a little bit bigger.
Yeah,
A
definitely.
little thicker. So this tiny little thin one is probably not the most impressive order, but this probably means we've got a lot more orders. So again, just giving you a lot of options to how you want to display your graph. There's a bunch of other settings here. We're not going to go through all of them, but it's all there to give you the sort of toggles and the dials that you can turn to make your graph visualization behave in the way that you want. Because the unfortunate thing with graph visualization is there's not really a one-size-fits-all, right?
No.
There's a lot of different ways it can be done. And so we're just giving the tools to the user to jig their graph visualization in the way that makes sense for the data they're displaying, the density of the graph, all sorts of things like this. And then I guess one last little thing is, if I want to quickly just look at the way property values are distributed amongst the graph, then we can just look at these little property filters. Now it just allow us to, at a glance, see for a given property value what the potential elements are. So you'll see, for instance, we've got our quantity per unit right there. I can hide them from the graph. I can select them, which is probably more useful. So you can see if I've selected my elements, that they'll all have the same quantity per unit, which is this 12 ounces per bottle. A very interesting measurement. I'm not sure I'm familiar with it, being in the UK. But we can navigate through all of our different elements here. Again, there's lots of things you can do in GLV. What if I wanted to quickly tweak a record, right? Maybe this is no longer discontinued, and I can just go ahead and change that directly on the database from the user interface. And so now I've updated this specific vertex, the Chang product, to be discontinued by just doing it directly from the user interface rather than having to write a Cypher query. And it just makes your life a little bit easier. You can do that, of course, not just with properties, but you can actually also do that with vertices and edges, nodes and relationships. I'm still very much a Tinkerbell first guy. That's what I've done a lot of. So the vertices and edges is very heavily ingrained in my head. Nodes and relationships, but you can basically start drawing your graph interactively as well. In fact, if I want to add a new product, I could do that real quick. The product has a lot of properties, so I'm not actually going to go through the entire process because that's a lot of things to specify. But I can just specify the individual values for each of these, save it, and that's just going to go ahead and create the actual node with all the details I've supplied on your database. It's quite useful if you want to just quickly tweak something, or if you're maybe just getting started and you want to just, you've got an empty Neo4j database, you want to just start drawing a graph. Put some elements, put some data in there.
And would it also adhere to constraints? So if you...
Yeah, that's right. So what we do is, if we go back to our little graph data model, everything that is being suggested over here is going to be based on the structure. I'm looking at the wrong graph data model. Apologies. This is the one I should be looking at right here. We're basically going to offer options based on the structure of the data model. And then if you were to, say, for instance, add something new entirely, say I want to add a person vertex, I can do that as well. Now you'll see person, no properties is being suggested because it's entirely new to our data schema, but I can say name, of course, self, save that. And there we go. So we've got our new vertex. And if we go back to our little data model now, our person is showing up as well because we've effectively modified the structure of the data schema by introducing a new node label. And we're just going to make that known directly within GLV. That applies if I start adding new properties as well. So if I go back to this and I say date of birth, I'm not going to use a date. I'm just going to pop that in really quickly, but I can start adding properties, save that, right? And our data model is just going to catch up to this as well. So there we go. So now we can see our new properties. If I were to start drawing some new relationships as well, say I wanted a relationship between, I believe, a product. Oh, sorry, it's a bit hard to draw there because it's a little bit small. There we go. So if I want to add an edge between a product and a person, I think I'm actually going to do that the other way around. I'm going to call it invented. I did not invent this for the record, but this is just for demo purposes. Put a little date in there. I've invented it in 2005. Why not? There we go. Save that.
Yeah.
And we've just drawn ourselves a new edge directly on the database. And once again, our schema is going to update accordingly, right? And so then when I go back to querying the data, I can say, I'm not going to call this P actually, because I already using person. Oh, no, sorry, that's the AuraDB one. I'm on the wrong one. I want to use this one, right? So now in my autocomplete, I'll have person right here, okay?
Yeah,
and then I'll be able to also query my
query.
newly created invented relationship, right? So everything kind of just keeps track of each other quite well, so that especially if you're at the early stages and you're just building up your data, that's all going to get there, right? That's all going to be known to G.V, where you keep track of things, and that means you can always access the full picture of your graph schema, not the whole data. That can be a bit lengthy, as we've established. But you can actually access the structure quite easily. So yeah, that's not everything, but I was going to maybe just take a little breather and see if we've got any questions.
Yeah, that's a great point. So if you have any questions, any points, then please let us know. I think it's a great tool. It's great overview. Thank you very much, Arthur. So really interesting to get all these, and definitely to, like Bryce is mentioning in the comments, great to see what other things you invented, but you just casually mentioned now. So this is really interesting for users that are getting started, but also for more advanced users, I would imagine.
Right.
So it's like a good mix of user audiences here. Let's maybe talk a little bit about licensing or how.
Yeah, of course, we should probably cover that. That's a good point. So I mean, I should have mentioned this, right? But G.V is ultimately a commercial product. We are quite lenient in terms of trials. Generally speaking, you can do a 1 month trial for free every 3 months. So you could try it today, get your 1 month trial, which is actually split in 2 weeks periods as well, just in case you have to go away on holiday or do something else, because it happens all the time.
Yeah.
You can get your 1 month free trial. You can access all of the functionality for free. You can optionally opt to not tell us who you are. We ask for like email address and all that, but you can just skip that altogether if you want.
Okay.
And then you're just free to use the tool as much as you like. And at the end of your 1 month trial, you'll be cordially invited, if you'd like to continue using the software, to purchase a license. The licensing, the way it's structured, is per user per year, or per user per month if you're just looking for a less committal pricing structure. And it basically just gives you full access to the software as long as you've got a valid license. But then again, if you've trialed it today, didn't really do it for you, what I recommend is try again 3 months, because we do feature releases every month pretty much, and that means in 3 months time software will be even better. So you might have a better time as well, and you'll be able to just try all over again for free. So we're offering all sorts of options for users to try, and we're also actually offering a completely free tier. If you've got a really small database, less than 500 nodes and 500 relationships, it's just 100% free. No need to sign up for a trial. None of that. So, if you wanted to start with a completely empty Neo4j instance and just kind of draw your graph and like ideate your schema, you can do that completely for free. No questions asked. You don't need to tell us who you are. You could just pop down right now and you'll be good to go, as long as your database is smaller than that. And then once it becomes bigger than that, you can still sign up for a 1 month trial. So basically, it'll be a while before you have to get to checkout. We're trying to give people a good amount of time to trial things and make sure that it's right for them before we ask them to send us a little something back.
Yeah, that's nice. That's very friendly. You mentioned regular releases being
Yeah, that's right. So we do monthly releases pretty much. Usually it's feature releases as well. Feature releases can include new functionality. So for instance, just recently we've reworked our Graph Data Explorer, which I'm actually super happy about this one. I've done quite a bit of work with this, so it looks really cool. It's actually very similar to the Neo4j Bloom path search. Apologies, I didn't fully rip it off, but we've basically built our own little path query builder that allows you to start building a path. So you'll see, for instance, I can start from a question, get to an entire little path. I can add little filters as well.
Click through your layout or sort of to your graph, and
yeah. So you can basically just like set up a little path query, and then you can run it and you can see it. Right?
Oh, nice.
Simple as that. So it's basically giving you a super easy way to just create your own little path without necessarily having to write a query. And you can add as many filters as you want. I don't know what we've got in there, nothing interesting, so we're going to skip that. But we could potentially, for instance, filter on the display name here, stuff like that. So it's basically just giving you a way to do a no-code querying exercise on your data. You can actually also do that directly from the elements. So if I pick, for instance, a user and I want to do a path search, that didn't do it. Apologies. Let me just redo that again. There we go. And then we want to see for this user, let's see, what answer he's provided. And we can just do it like that, simple as, and that just loads the additional data on the graph. So it's giving you a way to kind of no-code explore your data, but with a little bit more filtering and a bit more precision than if you were just kind of grabbing a vertex, for instance, like load me a bunch of edges, or maybe load me the provided or commented or whatever.
This is also
relationships.
Oftentimes a bit random, and then you just don't, not really helpful.
Yeah, so anyway. We don't always get feature releases like this. We don't always have crazy functionality, but quite often we aim to have like one genuinely good new feature. One that we're actually working on right now that I'm kind of excited about is around the query editing side of things. So right now you can see details of your schema elements as you're writing your query. One thing I'd really like to have is the ability to see official Cypher documentation as you're writing your query. Now you'll see that right now if I click on these, nothing happens. But what we're working on is making it that when you're auto-completing or so I'm going to start typing match, when you're auto-completing or when you're focusing on a specific area of your query, to show actual relevant Cypher documentation on the side panel.
Cool.
So that you don't have to just go between the documentation. We point you directly to the useful part of the documentation to write your query because, even if you're a Cypher wizard, there's always going to be that one clause sometimes that you're going to be like, oh, hold on, how does that work? I need to look that up. And we're just going to make it that you don't even have to look up. It just shows right there on your screen. So that's one of the next thing that we're working on, and we're hoping to release probably next month. So this type of stuff, but everything is built.
That's a very, very nice idea. I mean, even if you need to look it up, you have it right there. I guess you can then expand and a little bit more about it, and then
we're all about creating reducing the friction.
That's
the querying process as much as possible, and for me that's the next big step. Cypher is a very comprehensive language, and that means you can do really complex things with it. But as you get more and more complex, having that little reminder of how things work is super helpful. And I know that the Cypher documentation for Neo4j includes a lot of examples as well, which is like the best way to learn how to use something and look at the example and you can see how it's done. And you can just go ahead and do that directly within G.V. So it's just, we're trying to make it that when you're doing your work with your graph database, you're not going to be spending too much time figuring things out. If someone wants to see the graph, just click play and you're good to go, right? If you want to write a query and you need to look stuff up, you don't need to look stuff up. It's right there for you, etc., etc. So it's very much a productivity tool, as most integrated development environments are. You could, if you wanted, use a command line interface, for instance, to interact with graph data, but that wouldn't go very well. That'd be very unpleasant. So use the GUI. That's much better.
It is much better, definitely, and it's very nicely done. Congratulations on that, definitely. So I really like what you shown today. You mentioned users if they are, don't feel like this is currently what they wanted, and then in 3 months they can come back. Is there a list of features they can expect, or is there a list of wish list basically for users? If somebody says,
that's a really good question. Yeah, so the thing to know about G.V is most of the features that went on the software have been recommended by someone at some point. We've spent a lot of time speaking with users to see what they're wanting from us, because ultimately we're trying to build a tool that helps users, and what better way to do that than to just ask them directly. And so if you're start using G.V, and if you've got questions or if you've got recommendations, feature requests, etc., just shoot us an email over at support@gw.com, or you can DM me on LinkedIn. A lot of people do that, and I'm actually totally cool with that. I don't feel that important that people can reach out, but it is always super, super helpful to hear what people want to be able to do on our software, because ultimately our job is to make graph database users have the best possible experience when they're interacting with a graph database. And we look to how relational databases have done it over several decades, and we say, this is what we want, but for graph databases. And there are some subtleties because graph databases are so different. Stuff like graph visualization, for instance, I think is probably the biggest difference, I think, in terms of tooling. But also, I think sometimes people get into very specific visualization use cases where it can be useful to have little toggles, dials, etc., that make it easier to get to the right viz. And so, yeah, if you tell us what you're looking for, then we'll be happy to put on the roadmap, and there's a chance also it might already be in there, and we're just working our way through it. We work as fast as we can, but we're not a 200 developers team, is all I'm going to say.
Definitely, but that's cool. That's cool that you're open for wishes, open for feature requests,
always.
And for exchange with the community. So I'm hoping maybe a couple of people will, after watching this, will come to you and with their wish list, or maybe at least give it a shot and try it out. Give the 1 month trial a go and see how it works for you, and see. I think it's what I like a lot is this multi-DB feature that you showed, is where you have maybe you're working on 2 different systems, or maybe you have a prod and a developer instance or something like that, and then you have these 2 running in parallel, and you can really access them at the same time from one place. I think that's a great feature.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to stick to the you only need the one user interface to work across all of your graph databases, so that you don't have to switch between different types of consoles or browsers or other things. It's all on the same screen, very easy to access, and you can just put them side by side if you want. Like I could, even if I wanted to, just put those 2 data models side by side. That makes absolutely no sense, of course, because those are completely different data models. But
yes.
If you had, say, a developer and a production instance of your database that were modeling the same type of data, and there were some variations between the schema of the 2, then you can very easily identify those visually here. So that's a really good way to kind of compare things without having to take a screenshot, put on one screen, take the other one, put on the other screen, etc.
Nobody wants to do
that. I guess one more thing I was going to mention very briefly, because I know we're running out of time, but I've not really even touched on that. I totally forgot. But one thing that you might sometimes want to do, something that you can do in Neo4j browser too, by the way, so we're not being super unique there, but you can just organize your queries within G.V and save them, right? So for instance, on this data set, which is the Stack Overflow, say I wanted to query answers, right? And maybe just filter them by something specific so that I can create a report, right? Say s.answer count superior to answer count, right? So I'm going to put a parameter in here.
Okay.
And what that's going to do is we're going to automatically detect that parameter. So you can see it's coming out right there. Now I can fill in the value and run the query there. Not super useful. But actually, I think answer count is on question, no answer. So I'm going to just change that to question. I'm going to cheat a little bit. Very easy way to detect, by the way, if your property does not match your label, it tells you right there.
Okay.
Right? What I can actually do is save that. I'm going to call it question with answer count. Very, very basic, of course. But I can save that on G.V, right? And I can come back to it later. So if I want to then run that as a report, kind of like a stored procedure almost, in a relational kind of sense, I could just provide my answer count here, run the query, and we'll just slide in the actual parameter in the query so that we can then basically just create parameterized reports within our database that are all easily accessible from G.V. They can be organized into folders, etc. Now, for the desktop version of G.V, not super impressive because it's single user, but we do have a web version that we're working on as well.
Okay.
That will allow you to basically just have this sort of enterprise platform on top of your Neo4j instances, all in the one place where you can build those reports. We're also working on dashboarding and a bunch of other things that will just basically giving you those like business intelligence capabilities so you could expose reports, queries, dashboards, yada yada, to non-technical users who will only be able to run these without being able to do much else. And that just basically gives you a quick way to give bits of insights from your data directly to the people that might actually need it on a day-to-day basis. It's not there yet, but that's something that we're planning to have released early next year. So Follow us on LinkedIn if you want to see the news. But you can expect an announcement in the coming months on that. I'm going to stop there because we've covered 1 million features at this point.
Yes,
Hopefully
we
that
did.
gives a pretty good overview.
Yeah, that was a great overview. Thank you very much, Arthur. I liked it a lot. I think it's a great tease for your future expansion of the platform. So I'm looking forward to that. All the links are, as I said in the beginning, in the video description. So if you want to check it out, go there. There's a link also to the documentation and to all the social media sites you just mentioned. So we can, you can have a look there. If you have any questions, any feedback, any requests for Arthur and the G.V team, then that's the place to go. But yeah, like we said, have a look at it, try it, and have a little trial.
Have a wonderful time.
And have a wonderful time. Exactly.
Get some hairballs in there. Get some hairballs. It's always fun.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Yeah, and like you said, we are nicely at the end of the hour already. So I just wanted to mention a few things that are happening. So on Monday, 18th of August, we're looking into new features of AuraDB. Michael and I in our Discover Aura series. On the 21st of August, we do smarter collaboration with AI and knowledge graph. So we didn't even talk about AI at all in this episode. So very different from what we had in the past. But obviously, all things GraphRag. But this one was different. So it's good to talk about something else in a while as well. If you want to stay in touch with the Neo4j community and what's happening around graph databases, then Nodes is a great place to register for. It's happening in November. Lots of tracks, lots of interesting sessions, lightning talks, and long format talks. And so we encourage you to register for it. We will do a Road to Nodes workshop series again in September. So that starts in about a month. Once we have all the dates and all the workshops ready, I'll let you know, and then you can subscribe to those as well. And if you want to know more, if you want to dive into the Neo4j world, check out the Graph Academy for your place to learn how to use Neo4j, and then maybe work with G.V alongside and apply your learned knowledge. Try Aura free. Again, we have also a free instance. So if you want no hassle, don't want to install anything except maybe G.V, then you can just go and create your Aura instance online and have it ready for you. And you don't have to worry about maintaining, managing all that stuff. So that's all done without any of you needing to do anything. And there's a free instance that is free. And then if you want to know more, the developer pages, we currently add new things about how to work with derivers, how to work with AI, obviously how to work with various tools and bits and pieces. So that's a place to go for that. And yeah, I think with that, we're end of it. Again, thank you very much, Arthur, for showcasing to us today G.V, how it works, how it looks like, and how easy it is to get started. So I think that was a great overview. Thank you very, very much for that. And thank you everybody for watching today, and wish you a great rest of the week. And I hope to see you next week on one of these other live streams that we are hosting. Until then.
Thanks very much, Alex. That was a great time. Really appreciate it. Really happy to present to the community as well.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. If you
let's do it again next year.
Let's do it again next year. Exactly. If you have built anything cool around graph databases, around Neo4j, let us know. I'm happy to have you either at Nodes. Well, Nodes Call for Paper is closed, but there's always next Nodes, or one of these live streams. So if you have something worth showing, please also you can ping me anytime on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I'll work hard on making sure I've got the next best thing to show next time. Thank you.
Looking forward to that, Arthur. I'll keep you up to that promise. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for watching, for participating today, and I'll see you around next time. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye.